Hello and welcome. We have a massive stack of sources to get through today. We are covering a story that is as unlikely as it is expansive. We are looking at the biography, the trajectory, and really the sheer survival instinct of Green Day. I think for a lot of you listening, when you hear that name, you probably have a very specific snapshot in your head.
That is a common psychological response to bands with long tenures. People anchor to specific visual eras.
Exactly. Like maybe you picture the Mud Cage Kids at Woodstock 94
Yeah.
looking like they just crawled out of a swamp. Or maybe it is the guy in the black shirt and red tie from 2004 leading a massive stadium chant. But looking at all this material we have gathered, we are talking about a phenomenon that has spanned nearly 40 years. We were tracking them from a garage in Rodeo, California, all the way up to where they are right now in early 2026.
It is a significant timeline to analyze. When you examine the breadth of their career, you are looking at a band that managed to bridge a gap that usually destroys musical artists. They started in the underground Bay Area punk scene, which, the documentation notes, was an incredibly insular scene, very dogmatic about its rules.
Oh, absolutely. It was strict.
Very strict. And yet they transitioned into global stadium superstardom without dissolving their core structure in the process. The sources suggest that their ability to adapt is the central framework we need to apply to this timeline.
So that is exactly what we're going to unpack for you today in this discussion.
Yeah.
We are going to go through this journey chronologically. We're starting with two 15-year-olds, and we're going to follow them through the grit of the Gilman Street scene, the absolute commercial explosion of 1994, the slump they hit in the middle of their career, and that massive, unexpected resurgence.
And the analysis will not stop there. The provided materials bring us right up to the present day. We will cover their structured activities in 2024, 2025, and the highly publicized start they have had to 2026.
Right. And as we go through this, we're going to look at the discography, the controversies, and those socio-political threads that run through their work. Now, just to be clear up front, when we discuss the political nature of their lyrics or their public statements, we are strictly reporting on the historical record provided in our sources.
Precisely. We are maintaining complete neutrality. The goal is to examine the sociopolitical context of their art and public statements without offering any personal endorsement or condemnation of those views. The discussion will adhere strictly to the factual timeline provided to us.
So let us get right into it. Part 1. We are going back to 1987. Picture this. We are in Rodeo, California. It is a working-class town in the East Bay Area. You have these two kids, Billie Joe Armstrong and Mike Dirnt. They are only 15 years old. They form a band, but they are not calling themselves Green Day yet. They actually start out under the name Sweet Children.
The nomenclature is interesting given the genre they were pursuing. However, the foundational work ethic was already present. It is important to note the personnel at this early stage. They did not have their famous drummer yet. They started with a musician named Raj Punjabi in those initial garage sessions.
Yeah, Raj Punjabi was the first guy behind the kit, but it did not take long for them to hook up with John Kiffmeyer. In the local scene, he was known by the pseudonym Al Sobrante. He replaces Punjabi, and that forms the early functioning nucleus of the group. But the name Sweet Children, it did not survive long.
The sources indicate the name change occurred in 1989.
Right. And the origin of the new name, Green Day, is one of those things that is very literal. It is very much a product of its specific time and geographical place.
It is a direct reference to their recreational habits during their youth.
Exactly. In the Bay Area slang of the late 80s, a Green Day was a day where you did absolutely nothing but sit around and smoke cannabis. You just had a Green Day. It is actually quite funny because later on, Armstrong admitted on the record that he thought it was a terrible band name. He has called it the worst band name in the world.
Despite his later misgivings, the name remained. And to understand their trajectory, you have to contextualize where they were operating at that specific time. This was not a generic garage band environment. They were cutting their teeth at a venue called 924 Gilman Street. This location is paramount to understanding their ideological foundation.
The legendary Gilman. I mean, you really cannot tell the Green Day story without talking about that specific building.
924 Gilman Street, located in Berkeley, was the absolute hub for the DIY punk scene. DIY standing for do-it-yourself. It was a volunteer-run, all-ages collective, and it operated under very strict parameters.
Very strict. We were talking rules painted on the walls.
Correct. The foundational rules included no racism, no sexism, no homophobia, and crucially for this timeline, No major label bands were allowed to perform there. This environment is where Armstrong was heavily influenced by local acts, particularly a band called Operation Ivy.
Operation Ivy was huge for them. You can hear that frantic, bouncy energy translating directly into what Green Day started doing. Gilman provided this ethos that would define them, but it would also eventually haunt them. It was a community that demanded total independence from corporate music structures.
Operating within that independent structure, they attracted the attention of Larry Livermore. He was the founder of Lookout Records, which was the primary independent label serving that specific scene. The data shows he recognized their commercial potential early on.
He signs them up. They get into a studio and release an EP called 1,000 Hours.
Yeah.
And then in 1990, they drop their debut full-length album, 39 Smooth.
If you analyze the audio from that early era, it is defined by a slightly different sonic profile than the mass market came to know later. A significant variable there is the drumming style of John Kiffmeyer.
Yeah, his style was, well, it was looser, a bit more traditional to the garage punk sound of the 80s. But then we get a major lineup shift. This is the shift that solidified the band we all know today, and it happens shortly after that debut release.
John Kiffmeyer made the decision to prioritize his education. He relocated to attend college at Humboldt State. This created a vacancy in a band that was steadily building regional momentum.
So that they need a drummer, fast. And this is where Trey Cool enters the picture.
Yeah.
He was playing in another band under Larry Livermore's umbrella, a group called The Lookouts. He joins Green Day permanently in 1990. And that is it. That's the classic lineup locked in. Armstrong on guitar and vocals, Dirnt on bass, and Cool on drums.
The introduction of Trey Cool altered the rhythmic dynamic of the band significantly. Analyzing the rhythm section before and after his arrival reveals a stark contrast. Cool brought a much more explosive, highly technical style.
He was incredibly fast. And he had this wild background. He actually went to clown college at one point, which explains a lot about his stage presence. But musically, he tightened everything up.
With this finalized lineup, they recorded their second album, Kerplunk, released in 1991. For an independent record on a small label, the commercial performance of Kerplunk was statistically massive. It sold 50,000 copies in the United States.
Which is just a staggering number for a band literally selling records out of the back of a van or relying on mail-order catalogs. That is not just a few friends buying the record. That indicates a genuine cultural movement bubbling up. And that level of underground noise, it does not stay a secret.
The major corporate labels began monitoring their metrics. They observed the independent sales figures and the consistent audience attendance at the Gilman venue.
They smelled money. And that leads us perfectly into the breakthrough era, which is part 2 of our discussion today. We are moving into the 1993 to 1996 period. This is where they explode, but it is also where they face an immediate, harsh backlash.
This represents the pivotal moment of friction in their professional timeline. The transition from an independent label to a major corporate label is frequently categorized as a betrayal within the rigid parameters of the punk community.
There was a massive bidding war. You had all these executives taking them out to fancy dinners, trying to get them to sign. But the band ended up choosing Reprise Records. And the reason they gave is quite revealing.
It was not a purely financial decision, according to the records.
Right. It was about a specific producer named Rob Cavallo. The band went on the record saying he was the only industry person they met who they felt they could actually talk to and connect with on a musical level. They felt he did not just see them as a product to be packaged, he actually understood the sound they were trying to capture.
However, signing that contract with Reprise had immediate cultural consequences. We established the strict operational rules of 924 Gilman Street earlier in this discussion. As soon as Green Day finalized that major label deal, they triggered the anti-corporate clause.
They were banned, outright banned from Gilman. They were viewed as having sold out. The very community that raised them, that gave them a stage when they were teenagers, literally shut the door in their faces.
The sociological impact on the band members was significant. Armstrong has a documented, quote, reflecting on this exact moment. He stated his realization that returning to the punk scene was no longer an option. He noted that regardless of whether they achieved global success or complete failure, that specific door was permanently closed.
He said the only thing he could do was get on his bike and go forward. The safety net was gone. They had to make this new album work.
And going forward culminated in the recording and release of the album Dookie.
Dookie, released in February 1994. They went into the studio and recorded the entire thing in just 3 weeks. And when it hit the market, it just erupted.
The efficiency of the recording process is notable, but the cultural penetration was unprecedented for that specific subgenre.
You had singles like Longview When I Come Around and Basket Case. If you were alive and consuming media in 1994, you could not turn on a radio or watch television without hearing those opening chords.
It is beneficial to pause and analyze Basket Case specifically. The lyrical content of that track was explicitly documenting Armstrong's clinical struggles with panic attacks and anxiety disorders.
It was a very raw admission.
Yes, it resonated widely because it took a serious, often stigmatized mental health struggle and packaged it within a high-energy, accessible, melodic structure. This allowed millions of young listeners to project their own psychological anxieties onto a highly consumable piece of media.
And the visuals from this era, they are iconic.
Yeah.
We talk about Woodstock 94. That performance is absolutely legendary.
The environmental conditions of the festival contributed heavily to the visual legacy.
It was pouring rain. The festival grounds turned into a massive mud pit, and Green Day's set just devolved into an absolute mud fight. The band was scooping up mud and throwing it at the crowd, and the crowd was hurling it right back at the stage. It was pure chaos.
The broadcast captured a state of total anarchy. However, that chaos resulted in physical consequences for the band.
Yeah, during that mud fight, a security guard actually mistook the bassist, Mike Dirnt, for a crazed fan trying to rush the stage. The guard tackled him to the ground and literally punched out some of his teeth.
A severe workplace injury documented on live television. Yet, from a marketing perspective, that pay-per-view broadcast reached millions of households globally. It solidified their brand identity as unpredictable and chaotic.
It was the best advertisement they never paid for. It showed them as dangerous, but also incredibly fun. And the numbers backed it up.
The statistical impact of the album Dookie is a matter of historical record. It achieved sales of over 10 million copies within the United States alone. It secured the Grammy Award for Best Alternative Album. Industry analysts routinely credit Green Day, alongside contemporaries like The Offspring and Rancid, with single-handedly reviving mainstream commercial interest in punk rock during the mid-90s.
They took a genre that had been pushed to the absolute fringes for a decade and dragged it right back to the center of global pop culture. But as you know, fame hits people differently. And for Green Day, it was not all a joyful victory lap.
The subsequent album cycle demonstrates a clear reactionary phase.
In 1995, they released Insomniac. And if you sit down and listen to Dookie and then immediately play Insomniac, the tonal shift is jarring. Insomniac is dark. It is aggressive. It completely sheds that sunny slacker vibe that made them famous.
The sources categorize this as a direct psychological response to their sudden, massive popularity. The documentation indicates they were deeply uncomfortable with the level of mainstream fame they achieved so rapidly.
They were exhausted. The lyrics on Insomniac are cynical, almost bitter at times.
Commercially, it did not replicate the anomalous success of Dookie, moving approximately 3 million units. However, it successfully communicated a recalibration of their identity, pushing back against the pop-punk label the media had assigned them.
And physically, the human body can only take so much. They were absolutely wiped out from relentless touring. They actually reached a point where they had to cancel a massive European tour during the Insomniac cycle, simply due to pure physical and mental exhaustion. They were burned out. They desperately needed a break.
Which introduces the next chronological phase, spanning from 1997 to roughly 2002. This era is defined by intentional artistic evolution, but simultaneously marked by a steady commercial decline.
Right. They realized they could not just keep rewriting the same three-chord songs forever.
Yeah.
That formula was going to get stale. So they started experimenting. And that leads to the album Nimrod in 1997.
Nimrod represents a deliberate deviation from the standard punk architecture. The instrumentation expanded significantly.
You hear surf rock elements, you hear horn sections playing ska, and critically, you hear acoustic guitars. It felt like they were in the studio just throwing every single idea at the wall to see what would stick.
The integration of the acoustic guitar is the most crucial variable here, as it produced the track Good Riddance, subtitled Time of Your Life.
A song you absolutely could not escape. It was everywhere. It was featured on the final clip show for the sitcom Seinfeld. It was used in the medical drama ER. It became the default prom song for an entire generation of high schoolers. If you went to a graduation ceremony in the late 90s, you heard that song.
Analytically, that track was a pivotal strategic moment. It provided empirical proof to the industry that Armstrong was capable of composing outside the strict confines of fast-paced punk rock. It demonstrated advanced compositional maturity.
But it also created a weird friction, right?
Yeah.
Because you had these core fans who bought tickets expecting a riot, and suddenly the guy is playing a gentle acoustic ballad.
Correct. The demographic data suggests it alienated a segment of their legacy audience. This tension between evolving their sound and retaining their aggressive core base became highly apparent during the cycle for their next album, Warning, released in the year 2000.
Warning was a massive left turn. It was heavily influenced by folk punk. They were listening to a lot of Bob Dylan and the Kinks. The acoustic guitar was no longer just for one ballad. It was the driving force of the record.
They attempted to bridge this gap by participating in the Warped Tour in the year 2000, a festival specifically targeting the punk and alternative demographic.
They were trying to reconnect with the kids in the parking lots.
However, the critical and commercial reception metrics were mixed. While Nimrod maintained strong sales via its crossover hit, Warning experienced a severe drop in retail performance. It achieved gold certification, a sharp decline from their previous multi-platinum status.
The narrative in the music press started to get really negative. Journalists were writing them off. The story became that Green Day was losing relevance, that they were a 90s novelty act fading away as the new millennium started, and heavy genres like nu metal started dominating the charts.
To combat this, they maintained a rigorous touring schedule, culminating in the Pop Disaster Tour of 2002, co-headlined with Blink-182.
But even then, you get the sense they were at a critical crossroads. And that specific crossroads leads us to one of the most fascinating what-if scenarios in modern music history. We have to talk about Cigarettes and Valentines.
The documentation on this event outlines a massive turning point. It is the album that was never released.
In 2003, they were back in the studio. They'd ground out an entire album's worth of material. It was titled Cigarettes and Valentines. The tracks were laid down, the record was nearly finished, and then the physical master tapes simply vanished. They were stolen directly from the studio.
From an operational standpoint, this forced an immediate crisis management decision. The standard industry protocol would dictate re-recording the existing material.
Because they knew how to play the songs. They had them memorized.
Exactly. But the internal consensus, as reported in the sources, was that the stolen material was not their optimal work. They evaluated the lost tracks as simply more of the same standard punk formula. Therefore, they made the radical decision to scrap the entire project entirely. They chose to start over with a completely blank slate.
Think about how terrifying that must have been. You have a band already watching their sales drop, already reading articles about how they're washed up, and they choose to throw away a year of work to start from absolute zero. But taking that massive risk is exactly what led to the creation of American Idiot.
This decision initiated a total creative reset. Released in 2004, American Idiot was structurally designed as a punk rock opera.
It had a narrative through line. It followed a fictional protagonist they called Jesus of Suburbia. It was sprawling, it was theatrical, and crucially, it was highly politically charged.
The chronological context is vital for analyzing its impact. The album was released exactly 2 months prior to the 2004 United States presidential election during the administration of George W. Bush.
The country was experiencing intense political division. And Green Day, rather than ignoring it, leaned straight into the storm.
The sources categorized the album as deliberate protest art. The lyrical content offered a specific critique of what the band termed the redneck agenda, alongside commentary on the proliferation of media misinformation.
And we are just reporting their artistic intentions here, looking at the historical context of what they put on the record. And that massive creative gamble paid off in ways no one predicted.
The metrics reflect a spectacular resurgence. American Idiot debuted at the #1 position on the Billboard 200 chart. It secured the Grammy Award for Best Rock Album.
And the single Boulevard of Broken Dreams took home the Grammy for Record of the Year. It was a total sweep.
It accomplished a rare demographic shift. It did not merely revive their existing career, it systematically introduced the band to an entirely new, younger generation of consumers who possess zero memory of the Gilman Street era. Statistically, they achieved a second distinct peak in their career trajectory.
They went from being the guys who wrote Dookie in the 90s to the guys who wrote American Idiot in the 2000s. Two completely different cultural milestones. Following that massive high, they understandably took a long break. It was a 5-year gap before they released another record.
In 2009, they returned with the album 21st Century Breakdown. For this project, they enlisted the production services of Butch Vig.
And they essentially continued that rock opera format. It was another dense, concept-heavy record. But there was a really interesting retail detail from this release regarding Walmart.
Yes, the confrontation with the retail sector over censorship. Walmart, citing corporate policy, refused to carry the album due to the presence of a parental advisory sticker. They formally requested that the band provide a censored, edited version for their store shelves.
And the band firmly said no. They refused to alter a single lyric.
Yeah.
They put out a statement saying there was nothing dirty about their record and that they were not going to compromise their artistic integrity for a retailer, so they simply bypassed the biggest physical retailer in the country.
The data indicates this principled stance did not severely impact their commercial standing. The album earned them another Grammy Award for Best Rock Album. Furthermore, the theatricality they had cultivated culminated in a full Broadway stage adaptation of American Idiot, which opened in 2010.
Just picture that. Green Day music, the soundtrack of punk rock, being performed on a Broadway stage with choreography. It is an incredibly long way from the dirt and sweat of 924 Gilman Street.
A substantial evolution in their cultural positioning, without question.
So we move into the next decade, part 5 of our outline. We are looking at 2011 through 2019. They're coming off the Broadway high, and they get incredibly ambitious once again.
In 2012, their output strategy shifted dramatically. They executed an aggressive release schedule, dropping 3 full-length studio albums in a span of just 3 months.
The trilogy, Uno, Dos, and Tre.
During this specific window, Jason White, a musician who had served as their touring guitarist for many years, was officially integrated as a full member of the band.
But releasing 3 albums that fast, it is a lot to ask of an audience.
The commercial analytics confirm that assessment. The trilogy underperformed relative to the massive benchmarks established by their previous 2 releases. The market was likely oversaturated. Additionally, the promotional infrastructure for these albums was abruptly halted by a significant personal crisis.
Right. We have to discuss the 2012 iHeartRadio Festival incident. This was a very public, very difficult moment to watch unfold.
The live broadcast captured a severe breakdown in operational protocol.
Billie Joe Armstrong was on stage performing, and he became convinced that the festival organizers were cutting Green Day's set short so that the pop artist Usher could have more time. Armstrong completely stopped playing the song Basket Case right in the middle of it.
He then engaged in a highly agitated, profanity-laced address to the audience and the festival management.
He started shouting about how long he had been around, explicitly stating he was not Justin Bieber, and then he violently smashed his guitar to pieces on the stage before walking off.
Following this public incident, the sources indicate Armstrong immediately entered a residential rehabilitation facility to address clinical substance abuse issues.
It was a frightening low point for the band, but it led to a necessary, quiet period of recovery and recalibration. And they did bounce back. In fact, they bounced back straight into history.
In 2015, during their very first year of eligibility, Green Day was officially inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
That is the ultimate validation, right? It cements their legacy permanently. And feeling that validation, they go back to the studio and release Revolution Radio in 2016.
Audio analysis of Revolution Radio indicates a deliberate return to a more stripped-down, raw sonic profile, moving away from the sprawling rock operas.
The lead single from that record was a track called Bang Bang, and it was heavy, both musically and topically. The lyrics were written from the psychological perspective of a mass shooter, exploring the horrific desire for social media fame through violence.
Concurrently, their live performances began to reincorporate direct political commentary. During the 2016 American Music Awards broadcast, the band interrupted their scheduled performance to initiate a vocal chant.
They chanted, "No Trump, no KKK, no fascist USA," on live network television. They were making it crystal clear exactly where they stood in the political landscape of that specific year.
This brings the timeline into the modern era.
Yes, part 6. We are looking at 2020 up to today. In 2020, they dropped their 13th studio album. Now, for the sake of this broadcast, we are going to refer to it by its sanitized title, Father of All.
The musical composition of Father of All represented another distinct pivot. The tracks heavily utilized garage rock and classic soul influences.
The songs were very short, very punchy. They had this massive stadium tour lined up called the Hella Mega Tour, co-headlining with Fall Out Boy and Weezer. But as we all know, global events intervened, and the pandemic forced them to delay that entire massive operation until 2021.
Following the eventual completion of that tour, the band entered their most recent major promotional cycle. In January of 2024, they released the album Saviors.
Saviors felt like a huge full-circle moment for them. The primary singles were The American Dream is Killing Me and Bobby Socks.
Listening to it, it really felt like they managed to blend the raw, frantic energy of Dookie with the sharp societal commentary of American Idiot. The documentation highlights their continued political consistency during this period. Throughout the promotional tour for Saviors, Armstrong engaged in a specific, repeated alteration of their legacy material.
Right, he was changing the lyrics again.
Yes. During live renditions of the song American Idiot, the original documented lyric is, "I am not a part of a redneck agenda." However, during a highly viewed New Year's Eve television broadcast, and subsequently at a surprise pop-up performance in a public subway station, he intentionally altered the phrasing.
He changed it to sing, I'm not a part of the MeV agenda. It was a direct, updated modification of a 20-year-old song to fit the political climate of 2024.
Advancing the timeline to last year, 2025, the band maintained a rigorous schedule of high-profile activities. In January, they anchored the Fire Aid benefit concert.
That was a massive show to help raise funds for wildfire relief efforts. They've always been very connected to California causes.
Furthermore, in April of 2025, they issued a deluxe edition of the Saviors album, which included previously unreleased material, notably a track titled Smash It Like Belushi.
And that same month, April 2025, they were the headliners at the Coachella Festival, a massive desert crowd. But honestly, the most surprising development from last year was not an album or a concert. It was a film project.
The project was titled New Year's Rev.
Yes, New Year's Rev. It was officially announced in February 2025, and it was produced by Live Nation. It is a feature-length comedy movie. It ended up premiering at the Toronto International Film Festival in September.
The thematic origins of the film are notable. While the narrative is entirely fictional, it is heavily inspired by the band's authentic early experiences touring the country in a cramped van.
The actual plot follows 3 fictional friends who go on this wild cross-country road trip, specifically to try and see a Green Day concert.
From an industry perspective, it demonstrates their capacity and willingness to leverage their brand into entirely different media formats, even decades into their career. Critical reception at the Toronto premiere generally praised the film for accurately capturing the chaotic spirit of the underground punk scene.
And that brings us right to the edge of the present moment. We are now in 2026, and literally just weeks ago, we had Super Bowl 60.
The events surrounding this broadcast present a fascinating case study in operational contrasts.
We really need to unpack this carefully, because if you look at the timeline of that single week in February, you see 2 completely different versions of Green Day operating simultaneously.
Precisely. Let us establish the primary event first. On February 8th, 2026, the band was contracted to perform at the opening ceremony of Super Bowl 60.
The biggest television audience of the year.
The setlist consisted of Holiday, Boulevard of Broken Dreams, and American Idiot. Analytically, the performance was highly polished. Crucially, the band intentionally omitted any ad-libbed political references or lyric changes. They executed the performance exactly as scripted for the global audience.
It was a very clean, professional stadium rock show. But the contrast happens when you look at what they were doing just 48 hours prior to that broadcast.
2 days before the Super Bowl, the band was hired to perform at a private, corporate-sponsored party in San Francisco. The event was bankrolled by the brands FanDuel and Spotify.
And the vibe in that room was completely different from the stadium. During that set, Armstrong took the microphone and publicly went after ICE agents, Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
The transcript of his remarks indicates he directly advised the agents to resign from their positions. He issued a warning that the current political administration would inevitably drop them like a bad habit.
So you have this incredible duality. On Friday night, you have the fiery, rebellious punk rock frontman yelling at government agencies inside a party paid for by tech and gambling corporations. And then on Sunday, you have the polished, smiling legacy act playing the hits for the NFL broadcast without rocking the boat.
The resulting social media metrics reflected a highly polarized audience response. A vocal segment of their fan base expressed disappointment regarding the sanitized nature of the Super Bowl performance, arguing it lacked their requisite punk edge.
While another segment was cheering on the fiery statements made at the pre-party.
Exactly. It perfectly illustrates the complex tightrope they are forced to navigate. They exist as a massive corporate-level legacy entity that simultaneously attempts to retain the ideological ethics of their DIY origins.
It is a fascinating balancing act. Now, before we conclude, we should briefly touch on Part 7 of our outline their various side projects, because these three guys simply do not know how to sit still.
Their supplementary output is remarkably prolific. The documentation lists numerous active side projects, including the Foxborough Hot Tubs, which serves as an outlet for pure garage rock experimentation.
You also have Pinhead Gunpowder and a cover band literally called the Cover-Ups. But the most interesting one by far is the Network.
The Network operated as a clandestine new wave side project.
Yeah, they wore these elaborate masks to hide their faces, and they engaged in this fake public feud with Green Day. The Network released an album called Money Money 2020 back in 2003, and then they dropped a sequel in 2020. For years, Green Day completely denied it was them.
From an artistic standpoint, operating under a pseudonym provided a necessary pressure release valve. It allowed them to experiment heavily with synthesizers and unconventional new wave structures that would have been rejected by the marketplace if released under the primary Green Day brand.
That kept them creatively sharp. Now, going back to that tightrope we discussed, we have to address the overarching controversies. Specifically, the endless, exhausting debate over what constitutes true punk.
This specific ideological debate has plagued their critical reception since the release of Dookie in 1994. Prominent legacy figures within the genre have offered harsh assessments. John Lydon, vocalist of the Sex Pistols, has been highly vocal in his disparagement.
Right. He went on the record basically saying Green Day did not earn their wings, that they were just putting on a costume and mimicking a style created by older bands.
Conversely, the data provides defense from equally prominent figures. Brett Gurewitz, a foundational member of the band Bad Religion, has publicly validated their status. His analytical argument posits that punk is simply an evolutionary branch of rock and roll, and Green Day represents the most statistically successful iteration of that branch.
Beyond the philosophical arguments, they have faced concrete incidents in recent years. We already noted the lyric changes. But there was also a deeply unfortunate situation at the 2017 Mad Cool Festival in Madrid.
That event involved a fatal workplace accident. An acrobat performing a stunt fell to his death in the venue shortly before Green Day was scheduled to perform.
And the band went out and played their entire set. This generated a massive wave of anger online from people who felt it was incredibly disrespectful and that they should have immediately canceled the performance.
However, subsequent operational reviews and statements from the band clarified the timeline. The band members were securely isolated in a backstage area and were kept completely uninformed of the fatality by festival management until after their performance had concluded.
Once you know those facts, the context changes completely. They simply did not know. Moving to a more localized controversy in 2024, there was the incident at Oracle Park. Billie Joe is an East Bay guy through and through.
His geographic loyalty remains a core component of his public persona.
And he used a stadium stage to absolutely go off on the ownership of the Oakland Athletics baseball team because they were moving the franchise to Las Vegas. He specifically called out the owner, John Fisher, and explicitly stated his hatred for Las Vegas.
The immediate consequence of that localized broadcast was a formal boycott. 2 major radio broadcasting stations in the Las Vegas market permanently removed Green Day's entire catalog from their rotation.
It was a localized hit, but it proved he still speaks his mind about his home turf. And just last year, in 2025, during a tour stop in South Africa, he updated the lyrics of American Idiot again.
The documented lyric modification in that instance was changing the line to, "I am not a part of the Elon agenda."
A clear reference to Elon Musk. And Musk actually responded to it on social media. Just proves that even decades into their career, they are still willing to poke the bear. They are not afraid to engage directly with current, highly polarizing figures.
Which brings us to the statistical summary of the materials provided.
So what does this massive timeline actually mean? When you step back and look at the raw numbers, it is genuinely staggering. We're talking about 75 million records sold worldwide, 5 Grammy Awards, and a continuous operational span of nearly 40 years.
The primary conclusion derived from this data is a narrative of extraordinary endurance. They successfully navigated the transition from an unheated garage and rodeo to the highly regulated environment of the Super Bowl stage.
They've had these incredible stratospheric peaks, and they had some very public valleys.
Yet, they have consistently maintained their relevance within the broader cultural conversation. They achieved this through calculated reinvention while simultaneously preserving their core sonic architecture. The records show they remain an active, touring entity capable of generating significant global headlines.
It is an incredible American journey. from kids calling themselves sweet children to releasing saviors, and now evolving into movie producers and Super Bowl performers. It leaves you wondering, when does a rebellion stop being a rebellion and simply become the establishment? Something to chew on. Well, that brings us to the end of our discussion today.
The analysis of their historical trajectory has been highly informative.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.